For this project, I'm using 3/4 inch thick plywood that I purchased from Home Depot. I started off breaking down the plywood into the required dimensions using my makeshift table saw that I installed into my collapsible workbench. You can see me build this bench in my previous video with plans provided. The saw was installed following DIY creator's video, links in the description below. Since this mortise jig is adjustable, I cut some slots for the bolts. In addition, I also cut recesses into the slots to allow for the bolt head to set flush inside so that no bolts were sticking out. This is important since it can interfere with the adjustments. Next, I began to cut U-channels for a 1/2 inch wide guiding rails. The saw was set at a height of 1/4 inch. This cut was done on the table saw by taking multiple passes until the U-channels were close to the dimensions, and then I used the guide rail piece to actually determine if I need to take off more material to ensure a good fit. And once I'm satisfied with the fit, I clean up with a chisel and repeat this process for all the other pieces that require channels. I then drill a hole for the bolts. Since the slots that were routed before used 5/16 inch router bits, I used the same diameter drill bit and will be using the same size bolts. The bolts sit in these holes and slide through the slots, which will be shown later when I'm assembling it together. And we arrive at the glue up stage. Here I align my pieces together first before I actually apply glue. I didn't glue these two pieces here, but decided that I would screw it instead since my pieces were quite small. I had to drill a pilot hole before screwing anything together. Now this piece here has a guiding block glued at the end. I made sure that it sat square in its actual location by placing it on the actual, or assembling it, and then using my square to make sure that it's 90 degrees. And it's important that the part sits perpendicular since it will be sliding back and forth, and this block is what keeps it perpendicular. And I repeated this process again for another guiding block for this piece as well. The guide rails were placed afterwards so that I could align them accordingly to the U-channels of the part that is supposed to mate with it. That way I don't make the mistake of misaligning the rails with respect to the channels. And while the glue dries, I screw the base together. The base here is where we mount the workpiece and is also where the jig attaches to the table. I didn't glue these two panels together, but instead secured it together using 5 screws. Reason being that I might modify in the future, so I didn't want to be, so I would want it to be able to be, or I would want to take it apart. The rails here on this piece were glued exactly as I did earlier. I glued the rail on and put it on first and then assembled the parts together to make sure that everything lined up nicely. And then I disassembled it and cleaned up the access glue. And lastly, I sanded everything to make sure that all the parts were smooth and that that they all slide each other nicely. Assembling the jig together is quite easy since everything is just kind of loosely bolted together and tightened accordingly. And then everything else is slided or is kind of self-aligning since they have all the U-channels and guide rails on them. And it kind of allows for relatively easy adjustments. One of the things that I don't like about it is that it kind of locks, which means you have to kind of fumble around with it, but it's for what it is, it's not a bad setup. And this piece here allows it for you to accommodate the jig for different size workpiece. And that concludes this build. If you like what you see, please click like and subscribe. Thanks.